So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Kummer. I'm with Xiting and responsible for sales and marketing here in the US. Today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues. One is Mario Taubert from our services team in Germany, and the other one is Jeff Porter from our services team here in the US. In case you wonder, no, they're not my imaginary friends because you obviously don't see them here, but they're with me on the phone. So they can hopefully answer any technical questions that I may not be able to answer. And before we begin our webinar about how to simplify the migration of authorizations to SAP S/4HANA, a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to discuss. First is, as I've already mentioned, this webinar is going to be recorded. So you will receive a link to the recording typically within 24 hours of the webinar. So by the time tomorrow, hopefully you'll have an email from Citrix or GoToWebinar with a link to the recording. I will also send out a link to our YouTube channel once I had a chance to upload the recording there as well. So you have the choice of either going to the GoToWebinar page or to YouTube. As I've mentioned, today's webinar is about simplifying the migration of roles and authorizations to SAP S/4HANA. The way the webinar is structured is that we'll talk about S/4HANA a little bit, and then we actually mention a case study that we've done together with one of our customers, and I'll show you throughout those slides how our customer migrated to S/4HANA. Today's webinar, as you can see, is with webcam on, so hopefully that makes it a little bit more, well, personal and somewhat interactive. And in about 10 seconds, all of your webcams are going to go on as well, so we can really see each other. No, that's obviously not going to happen, but at least you can see me. And for those of you, we have a relatively full house today, so we had a lot of registrations. And for those of you who can't make it today or who couldn't get in or whatever the case may be, we have the same webinar again on May 23rd. That's the week after SAP Sapphire at 1 p.m. Eastern again. So you can certainly join there again if you have to drop off early, or if you have colleagues who couldn't make it today, just let them know and they can register for our second session. Now, with that being said, let's look quickly at the agenda about today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Xiting. Based on the names I see here in our attendee list, there are certainly some that already know who we are and what we do, but there are also some who have probably never heard about Xiting. So I'd like to tell you just a few words about who we are and what we do. Then we'll talk about what's new in S/4HANA, more from a high-level perspective, not necessarily related to roles and authorizations, but we'll cover that, of course, as well. Then we're going to take a look at a case study we've done together with the Bell Food Group, one of our Swiss customers. And I'll tell you a little bit about what challenges they had and how Xiting could help solve some of those issues and ultimately expedite the migration to S/4HANA. Then we'll do a demo, a slide-based demo that is, so I'll show you exactly how Bell migrated their roles and authorizations to S/4HANA and made their old role concept compatible with S/4HANA. And then we have about 15 minutes for questions, and that leads us to an important point. If you have any questions, you can use the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Depending on the operating system you're on, that's usually on the right-hand side. It may be collapsed, so if you open up the GoToWebinar control panel, you may see a little triangle and the word questions next to it. If you click on that, it'll expand. And please use that to type in your questions. Jeff and Mario are going to keep an eye on that box, and then at the end, when we have that 15-minute slot to address those questions, we'll certainly try our best to answer them. So please use that questions box and type in any questions anytime, really. So you can type them in during the webinar, and then we'll just pick them up at the end. All right. So with that being said, just a few brief words about Xiting. We were founded in 2008 by SAP security experts. We are headquartered in Switzerland, and we have offices in Germany, Switzerland, England and the US. We just came to the US fairly recently. In fact, in August of last year, we came here to the US. We have about 50 employees, and we have a very close relationship with SAP, and more specifically with SAP Education. So we develop and deliver a lot of training classes for and through SAP. That means if you go to training.sap.com and maybe look at the advanced SAP Authorizations course or workshop, then that's a class that we delivered, that we developed for SAP, and we also deliver through SAP. Now, let's jump right into it. Let's take a quick look at what S4HANA is and what it may mean for you. So S4HANA is a completely new product line that SAP developed with the goal of making things simpler at the end of the day. So let's use an example here. On the right-hand side, you see the task or the process of registering a vendor invoice. And today, in your legacy ECC system, basically, or SAP system, there are at least two ways of doing that. You could register a vendor invoice through material management, or through finance. And so it's basically redundant capability inside of SAP. In S4HANA, SAP simplified that, and there is only now one solution for this process, and it's called invoice management. So that's just one of the examples of how SAP has simplified not only the data model, but the overall architecture, with the goal of offering only one solution for each requirement instead of having a number of redundant transactions, etc. And that really led to said reduction of transactions as well as applications. And I see someone is raising a hand here. Not exactly sure what that means, maybe by accident. As a result of that, well, simplification and consolidation, SAP has significantly reduced the applications and transactions, and that has a significant impact on your roles and authorizations, as we'll learn throughout this presentation. Now, if you want to or not, at some point, S4HANA is going to be the center of your data world, because whatever you have today is going to go end of life at some point, and the future that SAP gently wants to push it towards to is S4HANA. So at some point we'll all be on S4HANA or a flavor thereof. What's important to understand is that the path to S4HANA, and maybe that's something that SAP hasn't communicated well enough, is not necessarily a direct upgrade, but instead it's either a greenfield implementation or a brownfield implementation. But in many cases, what you do is you set up a new instance of S4HANA, you perform or you add fresh configuration, and then you transfer data over from your old system to S4HANA rather than upgrading the system itself. And that has certainly a number of consequences that we'll address here in a bit. Generally speaking, there are three major areas where you'll see changes. There is an impact on your system architecture. There are a number of functions that are either new, that have changed, or that have become obsolete. And there are new user interfaces such as Fiori. And we'll address all three areas over the next couple of slides, and I'll tell you what the impact specifically from a role and authorization perspective is. So let's start with the impact on your system architecture. And I want to give you two examples, but before we get into the examples, let's take a look at what you get when you deploy S4HANA Core, or S4HANA EM as it's called sometimes. Basically, with the core S4HANA, you get a number of modules and applications that in the past were sometimes on separate instances for a number of good reasons. So with S4HANA Core, you get S procurement, or sourcing and procurement, R&D, manufacturing, supply chain, etc. Finance obviously is a a big deal with S4HANA, and also HCM. So your HR system comes bundled with S4HANA Core. And traditionally, you have your HCM system on a dedicated instance for good reasons, because whenever the tax code changes or whenever laws change that impact your HR basically, or HR environment, then you could simply apply patches and updates, and you do that without affecting any of the other instances. Now with S4HANA, since HCM is bundled as part of the whole system on a single instance, whenever you need to patch your HCM system, it's going to affect the rest or the remaining modules that you've listed here as well. So that's a significant change maybe to how HCM was treated in the past. Before we get to the second example, let's also take a very brief look at some of the cloud offerings that SAP provides. There are obviously a number of cloud solutions that work very nicely and integrate very nicely with an on-premise S4HANA. There is Ariba, Hybris, SuccessFactors to complement HCM, Fieldglass, Concur, maybe for travel expenses, etc. The important part to understand here is that most of those cloud solutions are not yet capable of completely replacing an on-premise equivalent. SuccessFactors is a good example. If you use SuccessFactors, you cannot use it for all your HR needs, because there are still certain capabilities in the on-premise solution that have not made it yet and maybe never will make it into SuccessFactors. And the same is true with some of those other solutions as well. So very likely you'll end up with a hybrid approach of an on-premise solution as part of S4HANA, as well as a cloud solution, and those two would be integrated properly. The second example I'd like to give you is regarding the consolidation of certain modules. So in the past, you may have had material management, supplier lifecycle management, and supplier relationship management on individual instances in your landscape. With S4HANA, they all become sourcing and procurement, or S-procurement. So there is another potential impact and change in your overall architecture that you will have to consider when moving or planning to move to S4HANA. Let's look at some of the changed functions, starting with new functions, new functionality basically that's available in S4HANA, and that includes a new general ledger, new cash management, and new output management. So those are functions that previously didn't exist, or at least not in that particular form that you will find now in S4HANA. More interestingly, from a role and authorization perspective, are some of the changed functions, starting with the BP transaction or the business partner capability. Obviously, BP is not new with S4HANA. I think it came with CRM a couple of years ago, but it has now in S4HANA a much more central role, as it became the central management for customer vendor master data. And you have to do a customer vendor integration that previously was optional. Now it's mandatory and required. And you also have to activate the material ledger. So we'll see throughout this presentation that the BP transaction is going to pop up over and over again and will have a significant impact on your role and authorization strategy. There is also an updated or changed asset management, and finance and controlling have finally seen some tighter integration. There is now a central journal and a common table for all your data sources and reporting. That's going to make your CFO very happy, because to a certain degree you don't have to reconcile tables anymore. So those are some of the change functions. There are also some functions that SAP has axed that are no longer available, that have become obsolete. Classical real estate management is one example. Type of costs, customer interaction center, or CIC, and the utilities customer electronic services, or UCES, is also no longer available in S4HANA. Now, apparently enough customers have complained, and so SAP decided with S4HANA 16.10 to reintroduce UCES, but now it's available as the multi-channel foundation for utilities and public sector. That's quite a mouthful here. But so the bottom line really is that when you move to S4HANA, you can expect a number of new functions, some changed functions that will impact your roles and authorizations, and also some functions that no longer exist. So if you rely on those functions for your processes, then you either have to complain very vigorously, or you have to change the way you do business in certain areas. And that's, I guess, the bottom line that I wanted to convey on those couple of slides. Now let's look at some of the new user interfaces. This is less critical from a role and authorization perspective, maybe with the exception of Fiori. So with S/4HANA, there are three popular entry points, if you will. There is still SAP GUI, and that is because the backend application server is still ABAP, so not much has changed from that perspective. There are still the legacy web UIs, and new there is Fiori and the Fiori Launchpad, and chances are for your business users and the non-power users, so to say, chances are they are going to be using Fiori apps, and there is a link here on the bottom with a list of all available apps that are available today. But generally speaking, from a Fiori perspective, we have seen a significant shift from function to role-based applications. That means you only see those apps or tiles in case of Fiori that you're authorized for. So if you don't have the authorization, you don't even see the application, right? And there are three main types of apps. There are transactional apps that allow you to do certain functions as create, delete, change. There are analytical apps for reporting and, well, as the name implies, analysis. And there are fact sheet type of apps that give you more information about certain objects. But overall, the good news is we still have SAP GUI, and we don't have to solely rely on Fiori. Now next, let's take a little bit of a deep dive and look at Hana Security, S/4HANA Security, and what that means from a role and authorization perspective. Now, the good news is that the security model hasn't changed that much. So we still deal with traditional ABAP applications, and that's because if you look here on the right-hand side, the application server is still very much ABAP based. Of course, it has a HANA database underneath, so that means you can no longer choose your own database. It has to be HANA. There's no more Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, DB2, or whatever you may have had in the past. But you can still use PFCG to maintain your roles, your ABAP roles. You can still use SU01 to do your user maintenance. There are still your dialogue and technical users. Technical user, for instance, is used for the connection between the application server and the database. And unlike maybe HANA Access, your users deal with the application server, and only database admins have direct access to the database, which is slightly different for some other HANA use cases. But for S/4HANA in particular, it's the same or a very similar structure to what you know today from NetWeaver ABAP. But because of those changes in functions that we've covered before, when you want to migrate to S/4HANA, chances are that you have to take a very close look at your existing role model and most likely do at least a partial redesign before you can migrate those roles over to S/4HANA. And so to help you with that, SAP has provided what they call a simplification list. It's basically a 400+ pages document that describes the changes or simplifications that SAP has introduced with S/4HANA. And let me give you one example here. I've mentioned a business partner BP transaction before, and that is going to be a very crucial and central transaction for us because it replaces a good number of legacy transactions that do not exist anymore on S/4HANA. So here is a list. It's just one of the half a page of those 400 pages basically that describes what legacy transactions have become obsolete in S/4HANA and are replaced with the BP transaction. So as you can see, if you have thousands of roles, then going through that simplification list and updating those roles one by one to make them S/4HANA compatible is very time consuming and ultimately expensive. And that's a prime example of what software can automate. And that's pretty much what we've done, as we'll see here in a bit. So let's take a look at how Bell handled that migration using a solution from Xiting. Bell is a Swiss-based company, one of the leading meat processors in Europe, in fact. They have about 10,000 employees. They had about 3 billion Swiss francs in annual revenue, and with the current exchange rate, that's pretty much the same as US dollars. And because of mergers and acquisitions, they ended up with a heterogeneous ERP landscape that they wanted to consolidate and then migrate to S/4HANA. So the systems that were in scope for the first wave of this project, this is a multi-year project, but we'll take a look at the first wave here, consisted of 3 country-specific SAP ERP systems, one for Switzerland, Germany, and Hungary. We had about 2,350 users in focus, and those users had 3,300 roles assigned that Bell wanted to redesign and simplify and optimize before migrating them over to S/4HANA. But the overall goals were to consolidate that heterogeneous ERP landscape and to migrate that landscape over to S/4HANA, and to do a role redesign in the process, because obviously whenever you reduce the number of roles or maybe make existing roles a little smaller, there's always also a chance to optimize your SAP licenses and maybe pay less money on the new system, right? So what they've done is they've chosen Xiting and the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite, or XAMS, to help with that effort, and more specifically to help with applying that 400+ pages of simplification list towards their existing roles. And before we go into exactly how we've done that and why, just a few words about the XAMS. So whenever I say XAMS, I mean the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite. But the goal of the XAMS basically is to significantly simplify and automate manual and time-consuming and cost-intensive tasks around role design, redesign, role maintenance, role testing, scanning of custom ABAP code, etc. That's in a nutshell what the XAMS does. More specifically, it consists of 7 modules that one can use individually or in combination. Specifically for the S/4HANA migration, we made extensive use of 2 of those modules, the role designer and the role profiler. So we'll go into details on those and show how they can be used for an S/4HANA migration. But I want to tell you, at least very briefly, I think we have time, about the other modules, because they may come in handy for an S/4HANA migration as well, but probably not to the extent of those 2 that I have marked here with this border. So let's start with the role designer. The role designer is a tool that allows you to virtually design roles or optimize your existing roles by loading, your existing roles, of course, and by also loading trace data, more specifically ST03N trace data, to understand what users were doing in the system for a certain period of time and how that compares with the roles they have currently assigned. In addition to that, what it can do is, once you have changed your roles in our virtual cockpit, so without impacting the system at all, you can push a button and we migrate those virtual roles into S/4HANA compatible roles and then publish them or generate them in PFCG. And we'll see more about that here in a bit. The ABAP Alchemist is meant as a classic ABAP code scanner, really, but from a role redesign perspective, we used it very often to scan your custom code either for missing authorization checks, and then we would propose checks that you should be adding to your code, or we can scan existing authorization checks and make sure those checks are properly proposed in SU24. The role builder is a module that can help you with testing and simulating role assignment in production without impacting users. So you can kind of shadow users in production with new roles without having to assign those roles, and see how well your new roles would work for those users in production without impacting them. Role replicator is a module that allows you to mass replicate roles across org sets, as we call them, so it makes your org field maintenance much easier. Exciting times is basically the counterpart of the role builder, and that's meant to reduce the risk during go live and to give users the ability to get their old roles back during go live if they run into an issue. Role Profiler is an analysis tool, so it can analyze your existing roles and tell you if you have potential issues, be it open authorizations, changed authorizations, if those roles don't follow your naming convention. But more importantly, from an S4 perspective, we can tell you how compatible your role concept is to S4HANA. And we can tell you exactly, based on your role selection, how many of the T codes in those roles are obsolete, replaced with another T code, etc., etc. And we'll see more about that here in a bit. And the security architect is really meant to be used at the end once you have done your redesign and once you have properly set up and configured your system to make sure it remains set up and configured according to best practice. But with that being said, let's jump right into the demo, and allow me to just take a sip of water here. Let's get right into the demo so I can show you how you can migrate your roles and authorizations to S4HANA basically by just a couple of clicks. So what you see here is the role profiler. So what I've done is I've made a role selection up here, and I've selected all my finance roles that I would like to migrate to S4HANA. And then I've run that migration of roles report. And that tells me, well, first of all, it gives me a list of the affected roles. And then it tells me how many objects in those roles are obsolete in S4HANA and how many new objects I would have to introduce to make those roles properly work on S4HANA. And of course, I can either adjust my roles right here. I can double click here and my roles would be adjusted based on what I see here. Or more realistically, I'm going to double click here on one of those numbers to get the details, to see the details basically. And here I get a list of all those 11, I think there are 11 objects here that are obsolete. I get here the object type. In my case, it's only transactions, but it could be a Web Pro, it could be a backend Fiori authorization object, whatever it may be. But in my case, it's all transactions that are obsolete on that particular role that I've selected. I can see the transaction code that's obsolete, a description, of course. I can jump into SU24, and I see the replacement. And as you can see here, that BP is going to pop up over and over again because it replaces a number of transactions that no longer exist in S4HANA. I also see here a little icon, an info icon. If I double click on that, I get a list of relevant OSS notes that maybe explain why SAP made a certain simplification. So this gives you a very good idea of basically what kind of work you have ahead of you if you want to migrate the selected roles to S4HANA. If there is no replacement available, in my example here, I have fortunately replacements for all of those transactions, but for some transactions there is no replacement, and I would see that here simply that field being empty. And that would indicate there is no replacement, and I just have to delete the transaction from my role. Here, as I've mentioned, if I double click on the OSS info icon here, I get a link to the relevant OSS notes, so I can do more reading and understand basically why SAP made a certain simplification. So that was the analysis part. Now we've just taken a look at our existing role concept to see basically what the damage is going to be if I want to migrate that concept to S4HANA. The next step would be to make that actual migration and potentially do a partial redesign in the process to maybe either slim down roles or to reduce the number of roles, again with the added benefit of potentially also reducing the license cost, doing some license optimization depending on how you've set up your user types and licenses. If you could maybe do it in SU01 and assign a license type, or maybe you have assigned the license type to a role, and by either slimming that role down, that may change the license type, or by removing certain roles, expensive roles so to say, You may also see an optimization in terms of SAP licenses. But generally speaking, the role designer takes three input buckets, basically. It takes the old roles from your system. It takes trace data, specifically ST03N data. And if your system is only set up to maybe trace or retain 1 month or 3 months worth of ST03N data, we can scoop that up and then wait a little bit and just keep adding on until we have enough trace data in our own table that makes that gives you a much better picture of what users are doing or have been doing in the system. And last but not least, we have implemented SAP's Simplification List in our software, so that's the third component, and all of those three we pipe through the role designer, and the output is basically a role design that's very much S/4HANA compatible, and I'd like to show you how that works. So here we have our role designer in the designer view. And what I've done is I have loaded my trace data for a certain time span. And what I can see here on the left-hand side is, well, in my case, a list of transactions grouped by component. So I can change the grouping here. I can have a long list, or I can group it by calling user or by component, whatever it may be. In my case, I have grouped it by component because I'm interested mostly in those finance transactions, because those are the ones, including my finance roles, that I would like to migrate over to S/4HANA. So here I have my list of transactions, how many users are affected, in how many roles, in how many virtual roles those transactions are, because in here in the middle, I can create virtual roles, meaning that those roles don't exist in the system and don't affect the system at all. They're only here in my play area, if you will, playground, virtual playground. On the right-hand side, I have a list of users that I loaded from the trace data, and I see how many transactions they have executed and how many they are still unauthorized for, and what the coverage percentage is. So what I can do now is, here in the middle, I can do a number of things. I can drag and drop T-codes over to the middle, or I can double-click here and create new role and type in a name. Let's say I want to create a role for a finance manager. So I type that in, and then I drag and drop T-codes over from the left to the middle to populate that virtual role with T-codes. If I don't know where to start or how to start, I can just apply a function template. So we provide templates for common job functions that I can just load, and we would populate then that role with specific transactions that we think should be in that finance manager role, for example. And then I can drag and drop over those roles to my users, and I can see immediately how that coverage percentage changes. So based on that, I can tell how well a role would work for users based on how well that user would be covered with that assignment. On a transaction basis so far, of course, but still, it gives me a very good and solid base to start my role redesign or role optimization. I can also switch into the reporting mode and get and run a number of reports to further tune my virtual role design. I can obviously look at the user status list and see exactly maybe if the users have a surplus, if they're over-authorized. If that's the case, I can find better matching roles, or I can carve out T-codes into smaller roles, which we see down here. So if I see that the user with a certain role assignment is over-authorized, I can say, okay, carve out the used transactions and put them into a smaller role. Or I can find a smaller role if it already exists. Or I can, run analysis to see how many users are over-authorized and what roles they don't need, etc., etc. There are a number of things that you can do from here. You can even analyze users for SOD conflict. So you have GRC. We can reach out to GRC's web service and analyze that role assignment for SOD conflicts. If you don't have GRC, we can do that based on our built-in engine as well. We can also generate all those virtual roles once you're happy with them directly in PFCG through the push of a button. But before we do that, we want to migrate to S/4HANA, right? Because so far the only thing we've done is we've loaded trace data. We've maybe loaded existing roles from PFCG, but we still have that issue that those roles likely contain objects that are obsolete or that have been replaced in S4HANA. So what are we going to do now? Well, we're going to start what we call the business modeling mode. And you can see once it's on down here, you see a migration data button up here. And when you click that, you can choose a migration type. And we can say, you know what? I want to migrate to S4HANA. Could also migrate to S4HANA Finance, but in my case, I want to do a migration to S4HANA. That applies the relevant chapters from SAP Simplification List towards my role concept. And again, I get an overview of how the objects in my roles would be impacted by that migration. So I can see here certain transactions where there is no replacement for them in S4HANA, indicated here by the little trash icon. That tells me that our migration wizard is simply going to delete that object because there is no replacement in S4HANA. Others, again with a very popular BP transaction, are simply going to get replaced. There are some Web.Dyn pros that are getting replaced as well. And if you had any backend Fiori app authorizations or objects in here, we would do that migration as well. So that just gives you an overview, again, with the list or the link to the OSS notes if you want to find out what's going on. And when you acknowledge those changes, we do the migration. So we apply the simplification list and replace all objects that need replacement. We delete the ones that are obsolete, etc., and give you then an overview of how many objects we added, how many we deleted, etc., and how we adjusted the trace data for S4HANA to make that to S4HANA compatible. And that in a nutshell is what it takes to migrate your roles and authorizations to S4HANA. So as you can see, comparing that to going through that simplification list is significantly quicker, and it gives you the opportunity to also do maybe a partial redesign in the process to make sure that before you migrate those roles blindly, you may also want to optimize them to remove unused T-codes, reduce authorizations or over-authorized users, etc. Make slimmer roles and maybe save some money in the process by maybe changing some of the user types. Okay. So that's pretty much what we did at Bell. And so let's look at some of the lessons that we've learned, because they're obviously important and apply both for a manual migration as well as for a migration using the XIMS. One important lesson we've learned is that SAP Simplification List is incomplete. So there are still there are simplifications in S4HANA that are not yet mentioned in the simplification list. Now we've already added all of those to our software, so we are up to date as far as our experience with the incomplete simplification list is concerned. We've also found out that there are certain areas of the BP framework that are different than how they are described. For instance, you still need display roles for certain transaction codes. There are still authorization objects checked that you wouldn't expect. And there is SU24 is an update is still required, and it's highly recommended, in fact. And you can do that SU24 optimization before you start the project, or as you go and create those new and migrate those roles and authorizations. Of course, you can do it from there as well. But the bottom line is, and that's really the interesting part from a project time, project cost perspective, based on what we've seen so far, and as I've mentioned, it's a multi-year project, but based on the waves that we've completed already, we and our customer as well expects to save roughly 50% of the time that they would have had to spend otherwise on migrating those roles and authorizations. I'm not talking about the overall S4HANA migration, because there's certainly master data migration and a lot of other things going on, but just from a role and authorization perspective, there is significant time-saving potential And I'm sure if you look at the simplification list, you would probably come to the same conclusion if you now know that you can just basically push a button and we tell you, okay, this is what we're going to change, push another button and we make that change. Of course, you still have to look at those roles and, make sure and fine tune them as you see fit. But overall, there is significant time saving potential simply by automating the application of the simplification list. It's really as simple as that. Now, S/4HANA is obviously an exciting new platform, but it comes with changes and certainly challenges as well. Remember those new, changed, and deleted functions, the impact on your system architecture through consolidation, etc. The security model of S/4HANA is fortunately more or less the same as what we already know today from NetWeaver ABAP. But because of the changed data model, you will have to take a look at your role and authorization concept and most likely do at least a partial redesign to move those roles and authorizations over, and you can automate that process. That's really the good news. Now, there is more information here on Xiting US/S/4HANA, but and when you go there, what we have done is basically just to give you an idea and to give you the ability to get some insight into what the migration may mean for you and for your particular environment. We've created two migration analyzers, one for GRC rule sets and one for roles. So what you can do is if you go to Xiting US/S/4HANA, you'll see here in that submenu two links to migration analyzers, and this one allows you to upload a GRC rule set, so it's a text file basically, and this one allows you to upload a role, a .sap file basically, and we tell you how many objects are obsolete in your roles and how many are replaced. And so that gives you a very quick understanding of what the impact would be on selected roles that you choose to upload. So give it a try, upload your roles and or your GRC rule set and see what you get. And then from there we can certainly have a further conversation and show you how you could potentially use the XIMS to do some more analysis, some more effort estimate in terms of what a migration would look like, and take it from there. And with that being said, I'm going to open it up for questions. We're actually right on time, so we have 16 minutes left. And I'm looking at the questions box here. So any questions that you may have, now is the time to punch them into the questions box, and we'll try to answer them. So here we have one question, for instance, is could you please talk about a couple of finance changes which are not covered in the simplification list published by SAP? So Mario, that may be a question for you, if you know the answer.
Yeah, it's difficult to pick a specific transaction right now, but an example for a glitch that SAP had in this list is that they spell transactions wrong. And yeah, if you replace your transaction with a wrong replacement, nothing will come out, nothing good will come out. And this is the experience that is in our tool that we experienced at the customers, which errors SAP had in the simplification list.
Okay, all right, thank you. The second question was more of a licensing question. If we purchase Xiting, are we licensed for both ECC and S4? So basically, XIMS is licensed by user. We don't care on how many systems you install it on. So if you have, let's say, 1,000 users on your ECC system that you want to migrate to S4, then it would be 1,000 licenses for those users, regardless of how many systems those users are on. Another question is if we also migrate custom code. So we migrate roles and authorizations, but we can certainly analyze your code. So we have the ABAP Alchemist that I've mentioned before that can scan your custom code specifically for a number of things, potential vulnerabilities, SQL statements, ABAP statements, ABAP keywords, etc., but also for missing and existing authorization checks that you either, well, if you're missing one, we can propose one that should be there, or if you already have an authorization check, we can make sure it's properly proposed in SU24, because that's also a prerequisite to then do the migration. You have a much easier time if you have an optimized and solid SU24 versus if you don't. How many migrations we've done so far? A good number, half a dozen probably. We do have a lot of experience with specifically the role and authorization aspect of S4 migrations, but we usually also work with services partners that handle other aspects of the S4 migration. So again, our goal really is, or our expertise is around roles and authorizations. And then maybe, Mario, that's one for you again. From a security perspective, won't an SU25 run fix the associations automatically?
Yeah, that's a good question, to be honest. The thing is, if you set up a whole new system with S4HANA and you want to use your old roles, you will have to migrate. And we don't know yet if the new transactions like business partner will have the old authorization objects with it, which are checked like from transactions like XK01. These objects are still checked, and we don't know if SAP takes them with them or not.
Okay, and then that's especially, I guess, if you do a greenfield implementation, then you either run your SU25 on the old system or on the new, right? But it's how you're going to get those two together.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. Yeah.
Right, and that's really where our software comes in, because it bridges that gap between, we know how the new system is going to look like, but we can apply that on your old. In other words, you would install the XAMS on your old system, and there we would already tell you and do that migration of roles, so that you can then take the compatible roles and move them over to S4HANA.
Yes, that's why we implemented not only the replacement mode, but also the attachment mode, where we just attach the new transactions and keep the old authorizations in the role to be safe.
Yeah, and I don't think that capability, well, I'm relatively certain that capability is not part of SU25.
Yeah.
Next question is also again regarding licenses. Is there a license model available for SAP partners? So yes. So what we do is we work obviously with partners and specifically with services and integration partners who can take the XIMS and then put services around that, and we have certain rental or subscription models available that are tailored for specific projects or for pilots or whatever it may be. So yes, we have that capability, and you can reach out to us offline and we can discuss the details about that, of course. Is there training available for this product? Yes, of course. So when we implement a solution, we usually do training workshops that applies to both end customers and end users, well, not maybe end users, but end customers, as well as to partners. So yes, we have training available that teaches you how to use the software, because as you can probably imagine, the software is very, very capable. It's not just focused on S4HANA, that's obviously an important topic for us, but it can do so much more, and you obviously have to know how to use those tools to get the most value out of that. So yes, we do provide the training. Let's see what else we have. Does ECC and BW have to be migrated at the same time to S4HANA? I'm not sure if that's a question you can answer, Mario.
No, it makes sense to migrate step by step, beginning with a smaller system. And so maybe it's up to you. You can start with the business warehouse and follow up with the ECC, but you can do it at the same time. It's really up to you.
Okay. All right, so it's either or. Then another question about where can we download that simplification list? No, I believe it's available to pretty much anyone, at least if you have an S user or a P user even maybe. And I believe I have a link here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out a link, or actually I could probably paste it in here. Let's see if we can go back here real quick. I had a link here, but it's relatively long. So what I can offer is I can send out as part of the link to the recording. Oh, there it is. So down here is that link. That's pretty long, but what I can do is with the link to the recording, I'll also include that link here to the simplification list, and from there you can download it. Next question is, XMS install on a central system like COS, Solman, or GRC mandatory? No, it's not mandatory. In fact, it's for the most part you would install it on individual application servers. There is one exception, that's one of the modules can be installed optionally on a solution manager for the purpose of doing those SAP security audits from a central location. But everything else, there is certainly no requirement to install it on a central system. Let's see. And there are a couple of questions that are more high level regarding the migration. I'm not sure if we can answer them, but I'll read them out loud anyway. Mario, if you can answer them, great. If not, we can maybe follow up. But one is, what are major and common issues faced while migrating to S/4HANA with different customers, where we need to focus more on basics to migrate to S/4HANA? So the second part I'm not sure I entirely understood, but what are some of the common issues? And based on what I've seen is some of the issues are certainly that the existing role concept may not be ideal and require a redesign even before you consider the migration of those roles. So that's what we've partially done, at least with Bell. Also the fact that the simplification list is not necessarily complete. So that were some of the challenges as well. I'm not sure, Mario, do you have any other challenges from the top of your head that you want to mention?
Yeah, that's the first step comes to mind too, and yeah, the other part would be you also talked about the data migration, that you have first to migrate your data and to clean up your data, which is also a big part of the migration to S/4HANA. These are the first two big steps, I would say.
Okay. Then another question is, if a certain role design, if that lends itself to an easier migration. So in other words, is it easier if you have a task-based roles or job-based roles or enabler roles or derived roles or composites? Does it make any difference in terms of how difficult the migration is? Or is it pretty much the same from at least our role designer perspective?
From the role designer perspective, I would say that it's slightly easier if you already have role-based roles or role-based roles, job-based roles. As our best practice is job roles, but I don't think it makes that much difference.
Okay. All right. And I think that was one more, but I'm not sure if that's something that's really related to us, but will BW be able to read the HANA data? Not even sure.
I'm not sure if I get the point of that question.
Question means, no, I'm not sure I understand that either. Yeah, but those were then otherwise pretty much all the questions. Looking at the time, we are 4 minutes short of the hour, so we may be able to give you a little bit, couple of minutes back of your day. Again, the recording is going to be available here shortly. I'm also going to send out a link to that simplification list. If you have any more questions that you couldn't ask or we couldn't answer or didn't answer to your satisfaction, be more than happy to talk to you offline. I'm going to show you here my contact information. I'm going to scroll back to the end. So you have my contact information. and you can certainly send me an email or give me a call. So mkummer@xiting.us is my email address. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. If I can't answer it, obviously I'm going to loop in Maria and Jeff so they can provide the answer. And with that being said, I thank you very much for spending an hour with us today. I hope you got something out of it. If not, or if you did, let us know. We always appreciate the feedback, of course, so we can do a better job next time. And just let us know via email. Try out the migration analyzer. It's free, obviously, so go there, upload your GRC rules, upload your roles, and see what impact that may have on a potential migration to S/4HANA. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate everyone, and have a good rest of your day.